Hello, folks. This is David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pub chess bluffer, talking to you on Sunday, June the 9th, 2019, which is, I believe, the Whitsun holiday back in Blighty. But I am sat here in my man cave in Hiroshima, where I recently played a game of chess with my regular partner, in which I was black and he opened with e4. And we'll get into the ins and outs of that game in a minute, and also the key learning tips, which are really about the development of your pieces. I won this game through superior development, and that's what we'll be looking at. But first of all, I want to indulge in a little bit of a boast for a mere pub chess bluffer. And it is that at the end of May, over on GameNot.com, which is where I hang out most as an online chess player, I ended May with a rating of 1675, losing a game on the 31st of May. And as soon as June broke, I myself broke into the longest, I think it must be the longest, winning run of my career as a casual chess player over on GameNot. And I've broken back into some personal best territory, a 6-month personal best run over here, which has enabled me to put on over 50 points on GameNot. Now, these ratings that the websites give you, they don't really count for anything compared to playing in competitions over the board, where it's a different game effectively. But anyway, it's nice to be in the 1700s again. My all-time record is 1744 on this site, so it'd be very cool if I could break through that and perhaps even start thinking about the 1800s during the course of this year. This run has got me to the top of the D1 league. There are 3 leagues in each letter. So from A1, A2, A3, and so I'm in D1, which is, I guess, the 10th league down. A couple of weeks ago, or 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was in D3. I managed to promote twice. I was then promptly demoted back into D2, and then I started to do well again in that league. And to my pleasant surprise, I have managed to hold my own after being promoted back into D1 and gone on this nice little run, which has taken me right up to the top of the league. Now, compared to my fellow players at the top, I have played more games, and I've achieved 5.5 points to my credit, and that is enough to get me to the top of the league for the time being. Now, if I'm lucky, I'll be at the top of the league and promoted into C3. I don't know if I've been in the C divisions before, so it'll be very nice to get into the C's. I'm not sure if I'll be able to stay in C3 for very long. One of the things is that when you are promoted, any games that you carry over from the lower league, they only bring half a point if you win, but if you lose 1.5 points, I think it is. So you can quickly be demoted. You can rack up a high negative score, as well as meeting, of course, a higher caliber of player as you go up into the higher league. So it's pretty tough. It gets tougher the higher you get. Anyway, that's my pub chess bluffery brag for now, and let's get back on with the main topic. Cheers, which is this game here with the French defense against e4. The theme being, if you're playing as white, it's essential that you maintain your initiative, your opening initiative, by developing your pieces into the center. So that's not what happened for white. I mean, obviously there was some development, but black achieved a developmental lead and also a dynamic setup that enabled black to win this game. Let's see how things developed. We have e4, e6, d4, d5, going into the French defense, the classical variation when the knight comes to c3, knight to f6 inviting the advance, as it were, of the king's pawn, or, as you can see, Leicester is recommending that white places his bishop on g5. Neither of those two things happened. What happened instead was a rather more passive move, f3. Now you see Leicester gives black an instant and small advantage here. Effectively, it's handing equality to black at a very early stage in the game, and black has this dynamic move, which I immediately executed, attacking the center with c5. And thereby solidifying that equality or small advantage. So if we just go back and thinking about this theme of development, so here clearly is a developing move. You're developing a bishop and you're pinning black's knight to the queen. So something dynamic is achieved with this. It's actually called, let's play it through, it's actually called the McCutcheon variation, at least by John Watson. Here on this website, it's called the Byrne variation. Whatever you want to call it, it's the early move of the bishop to g5. Now there are two good responses to this that black can do. One is the Leicester recommendation here, in which the D pawn takes e4, which John Watson, in his excellent book on the French defense, no longer focuses on. This move was one of his recommendations in I think the third edition of Play the French. I have here the fourth edition, in which he spends much more time. Well, he merely refers to this move. He doesn't talk about it in the fourth edition. Instead, he recommends what's called the McCutcheon variation. This response to the McCutcheon variation, in which black does a counter pin of the white knight, pinning the white knight to the king. I may have made a video already mentioning this McCutcheon variation. In fact, I think I have, and at some stage I'll make a more detailed video in the future about it. So that is one way for white to go in this setup from the classical to the McCutcheon. The other way, as I mentioned, is the advance of the e-pawn, and black then moves his knight back to d7. So the theme of this game is the importance on white's part of developing the pieces early to maintain the initiative. Here, clearly, a piece hasn't been developed, but that's okay because it forces black to move the same piece twice, which is actually black's aim. But what it means is there's still an equality of development, so it's not a big problem for white not to develop a second piece at this stage, if you see what I mean. So either bishop to g5 or the e5 move are positive moves for white in the French defense. This f3 move is a bit passive. It's shoring up, attempting to shore up a pawn that doesn't really need to be shored up at this stage, because the pawn can simply advance or the knight can be pinned. Anyway, so this f3 move gives black instant equality, or even a slight advantage, and a nice dynamic reply, which is this c5 move. How did things develop from here? White decided to take that pawn, which then enables black immediately to develop a piece into the center. This is a lovely place for the black bishop to be, with this nice diagonal here. So claiming some more central space and getting an advantage on development. So we have two minor pieces developed already for black and only one for white. White's response here, clearly Leicester doesn't like this move very much. Why might that be? Well, let's just see what Leicester recommends instead of that. Leicester recommends breaking up the center here. And then, however, black responds. White can then get in this early check. And then black is committed to this kind of development here. And in comes that McCutcheon-style move later, pinning the knight to the queen. Black is maintaining advantage, but this is a trickier situation for black to navigate than what is emerging in the game I played on Wednesday. Now, to be fair to white, the reason white has moved his knight here is because he's aiming to come here and put pressure on the d pawn with the queen, the c knight, the e pawn, and then this knight here. However, it can easily be answered by black. Now, it's quite interesting that Lichess is not at all keen on this move of mine. Is that actually what I did? Knight to c6, developing a piece. Why doesn't Lichess like it very much? Because of this series of moves, I suppose. It's quite interesting that Lichess is a bit wobbly with these moves. Here we have simply restored our advantage. So I don't think it's a bad thing for black to develop this knight when I developed it. Let's go back. So we have let's go back to here. We have f3, c5, takes, brings the knight out. Okay, like the engine has given it some more thought, and in fact, I'm not sure what that wobble was all about. The advantage for black is in fact maintained. So there we go. The knight comes to f4 to attack or to put further pressure on the d pawn. However, now this is one move. I admit this is one move that I doubt that John Watson would recommend here. This is more of an advanced variation style move of the queen to b6. However, from my point of view, at this level of chess, I feel that this kind of pressure here, this sort of veiled threat to attack the king through this weak f2 square, will cause some problems for my opponent. And also eyeing up this pawn here, the b2 pawn hampers the possibilities for this bishop to get moving and get developing. So that was my rationale behind this move. It may have removed what advantage I had, but it's hardly too much of a problem in this game. So what is recommended instead is an early castle. However, I think this move worked well under the circumstances in which I was playing. We then have it does indeed induce this queen move to protect that square, which again hampers white's development, because white has still to develop this bishop here and this bishop here. So we have these two undeveloped pieces stuck in the middle. The king cannot castle all the time. Both of those are on their home squares. The queen moving here hampers the movement of the bishop, as does this pawn, and this bishop is still asleep. Meanwhile, so we have white has 2 developed minor pieces, black has 3 developed minor pieces, and it would be very easy to develop this bishop, which is in fact what I do next. And the reason why I develop the bishop now is actually because I was thinking about the possibilities for my knight, which I'll do in green. My knight is aiming for this square. It's a very nice square, d4, to get my knight into. Because from d4, the knight can attack the queen, and the knight is also looking at this c2 square here, where we can get a nice fork of the king and the rook. So there's a lot of potential for my knight. I'm not sure what that early blip by Lichess was all about, because that's a fine square for the knight to be aiming for, that excellent d4 square. So that's where we were at this stage of play. Oh yeah, so why did I move my bishop and not immediately move my knight here? Why did I delay? Well, partly I want to complete my development. All it needs now is for the king to castle. But actually, if I had been too hasty in moving my knight forward to that lovely d4 square, white had the ideal response, which was to move the queen down to this square here. And if the bishop was still on the home base, the queen would then be able to, the queen would then be checking the king, and there'd probably be a swap off of queens. So in other words, white could get off the hook of the threatened knight's move to d4. So the bishop's move, it develops another minor piece, or the last minor piece needing to be developed, and it protects the king from this queen's counter here. If the queen comes in here and goes check, the queen simply falls. So that is all part of the preparation for the knight to d4 move. That is the key move in this game. Okay, so I moved my bishop to d7, and white still worried about the b pawn situation here, which my queen is eyeing rather idly perhaps. White is induced into moving the pawn to b3. You can see that Lichess doesn't like this move at all. It weakens the pawn structure, it weakens the defense of the knight, and it fails to do anything dynamic towards white's development. We still have the two bishops sat on their home squares, 9 moves into the game. And so I complete my development by castling, since it seems almost as if I have a free move. Now, the next move that happens, again, this is a further weakening for white. White is ambitiously attacking in the center, but without having solved developmental problems on the back line. So this is premature. And there is my prepared ideal response, which is to completely ignore that pawn and go on the offensive. My setup is ready for attack. I have pieces in dynamic positions. I've got a lot of options here. So the knight attacks the queen moves forward, and now I can think about what to do in the center in this situation here. And Lichess, I think at some stage, as it keeps thinking, it changes its mind on several things. I think at one stage it recommended that I take, there we go, it's recommending that I take that pawn. However, I neither took the pawn nor moved my rook over to c8. Instead, I felt it would put more pressure on white if I advanced the pawn. And perhaps it also solidifies my knight in the center. But there's another point, which is this nice rank here. I can bring one of my rooks to e8 and start looking at that king who is stuck in the center still. And by advancing my pawn, attacking the knight, once again, a piece that's already been developed will have to move, and so the bishops will remain stuck on their home base. I hope you're beginning to see the theme here of how important it is for white to actually focus on developing pieces into the center rather than these piecemeal attacks before everything has been properly developed. So I attack the knight with my pawn. The knight moves back to h3, and my opponent pointed out that he's actually protecting this square from my veiled threat. This is all the time a veiled threat. It's a bit of a pub chess bluffer's bluff, because by putting putting in a veiled threat, we've caused a complete dislocation of White's organization. There was first of all the queen move here, now the queen's moved again there, and there's this disruption here to the central defense, to the pawn structure, and two sleeping bishops. So it's been quite a successful job of pub chess bluffery. It's the sort of thing you can enjoy doing at this level of chess. I wouldn't recommend it if you're planning to be involved in tournaments at a higher level. However, for the pub chess bluffer, this is all grist to the mill. So how do we respond? It looks like we've got a nice some nice initiative running here. And so let's attack the queen. The bishop is, of course, being defended by my knight, which hasn't yet made its final attack, which is aiming for this square here. Let's just keep that square marked. So the red circle is the target. That's the target square for our knight, but there's no hurry because we are so far ahead developmentally that we can put more pressure on the center. So we bring the bishop in to attack the queen. And this induces yet another queen move. We've had quite a few queen moves. The queen has moved to e2, and then to d3, and now to c4. So in 13 moves by white, 3 have been queen moves. Now, let's face it, the queen is now, there is now some extra support for this pawn, the queen and the knight. So that may be a plus, but I don't think it's enough, because we now have the queen moved away from doing duty defending the poor old pawn over here. So the queen moves away after the bishop attacks. And so this pawn is now undefended. What should we do about that? Well, let's nobble that pawn. Check. The king must move. And yeah, at this stage, it's not entirely necessary for black to gobble up the rook. More pressure can be piled on. This move here is one of them. However, I decided to cash in and get that rook. Also because with these two bishops on their home station, the knight, I mean, I guess this bishop could come here and attack the knight, and then the knight can just pick up this pawn here, and so it'll be a pawn and a rook for a knight, which isn't too bad at all. However, so this rook here is completely dormant. We've got the two bishops have knocked out, especially this bishop here, still unable to move, has completely knocked this rook out of the action. You've got the knight here blocking the pawn. You've got the bishop here blocking any move by that rook. So why not pick up a rook? It seems like we've got time on our hands, even though our clocks are running down. Let's not spend too much energy thinking hard when we can just do the easy thing. So that's what I did. I thought I'll just grab the rook and work from there. So we now have an attempt to block access to the center, but because we are now material ahead as well as developmentally ahead, we're materially ahead, we can simply swap off and pop in another check against the king, who moves there. And so yeah, this is actually a nice move. Moving the rook over here. There's a veiled attack on the queen, which can be unleashed when I get around to moving this bishop. For my part, however, I'm looking actually at another attack on the queen through this square here. The king queen here are nicely lined up for my bishop. If I can get my bishop onto this square protected by the queen, then it will be goodbye to the white queen. So I brought my bishop back down there, back down to 7 with this attack in mind. What will the response be? Interestingly, the move which was made was at one stage recommended. I don't know if they'll do it, if Lichess will get around to doing it again. Was actually recommended by Lichess, but it's a move that gets white into even more trouble. It's this A4 move, which in my early analysis of this game, Lichess made it as a quick recommendation, probably instantly regretted it, because once it comes in, it allows my knight to escape from that corner, because well, that pawn becomes unguarded and the queen is guarding the knight from this queen here. So now the reason why white moves the pawn to A4, protected by B3, is to prevent this check move here. But as you can see, it doesn't do white any good. At the moment, we can't do it because we can't do that check, because the pawn is still on its station here. However, we pick up yet another pawn and our knight is back in play. So the king attacks the knight, but that allows the knight to attack the king, and the king retreats to D1, which allows the bishop to return. So the bishop now thinks, oh well, this pinning move here is no longer in play, so let's get a check in down here and see how things go. Yes, it probably would have been better here to have developed the bishop. It would involve a swap off of pieces, so the bishops would be swapped off. It might involve the queen. It's very difficult because let's just do it and show you the difficulty. So it seems to frees up the rook, but indeed Lichess recommends that we take it immediately. The king can't take back because the knight is protecting the bishop. And then, of course, if the queen takes back, then the knight takes the queen, and it's pretty much game over. Well, you can see what the bar is doing. It is game over. So rather than get involved in that unpleasant set of exchanges, my opponent moved his king to D2, and here we check with the queen, and what happens next is, well, we were not able to get in this pin of the queen against the king, so we get in this one instead. And so now it really is game over. Let's just erase the redundant pinning idea and continue from here. So the queen desperately takes the bishop, the queen takes the queen, and the king goes on his merry way. Perhaps not so merry. What happens next? As you can see, we're beginning to see forced mate series, a series of moves that bring about an unavoidable checkmate. We're now in the end game. The target seems that checkmate can be achieved by move 27. We're on move 24. Let's see how we do. So the first step is to move the queen down to that E1 square, once again taking advantage of the sleeping bishops. So the poor old rook never gets a look in this game. There we go, check. Okay, the king moves over. Now, to get that forced check, we need to move our rook to C8. But we just pick up the bishop. It's the lazy chess player's guide to winning at chess today. The knight indeed comes back, not to the recommended square, but at least the right piece is moved in the general direction of the center. Now, The recommended moves you can see is moving. It's rather a clever series. Let's have a look at how checkmate is achieved, because I go by a different route. This leaves the king completely stranded in the center. There's no way that white can save the king from the final check. So we have really just a token move. And now, when the knight comes in here, it's a very nice checkmate. The king cannot move down these onto any of those squares, cannot move here, cannot move here because of the bishop, can't move here because of the queen, and can't move there because of the little pawn who completes the job of checkmate. The king is completely surrounded. All our pieces, actually our rooks had a very easy life of it. They did nothing. So three rooks played no part in this game. The fourth rook's only part was to be a victim of a vicious fork here. So this game was pretty much completely absent of rook moves. The only time the rook moved was when my king castled. And yet the white king is surrounded by enemy pieces. 2 white pieces and 1 black piece have not developed at all. So there we are. However, I did not achieve checkmate by that series of moves. I achieved it by a different series of moves, and actually more quickly because of an oversight. But checkmate is unavoidable. So I moved my queen in here, protected by the knight. So get as close to the king is how I like to think about it. The king moves. I check again, but this way. So I'm now outside of that mating pattern which we saw earlier. And instead of moving the knight in, the bishop is moved in, and from here we get checkmate. So the king cannot move here. Again, this little pawn has his role to play here, and the queen is guarding that square there. So there we are. The king is surrounded by enemy pieces. And oh yes, we should say the bishop did finally get a move in. Right at the end of the game, the bishop moved, but to no avail. So the big takeaway from this rather enjoyable game from Black's point of view is that you need to take development very seriously as White, of course as Black too, but this is really looking at White's failings, failure to develop. There were 4 pieces that failed to develop. There were the 2 bishops sat on their home squares throughout the game, hampering any activity by the rooks and preventing the king from being able to castle. So it is vital that you take development seriously and develop into the center to maintain White's initiative and that slight edge that White has with that first move going into the game. Okay, on the other hand, I recommend the French defense against e4. It's a very dynamic defense against e4, something that I enjoy very much playing with. Just as a final tip, the one problem you can have with the French defense as the black player is this white squared bishop, because of the nature of that early setup. If we just have a quick look at how things go, the setup comes in like this, and you can see the bishop doesn't have access to much of the board, and that is especially so if it leads into the advanced variation here, because the knight comes back in, and this knight, once white does something, this knight very often develops up here. Even if we get in that move and something else, we have these moves here. So the big question for black in the French defense is how to deal with this white knight. White bishop. If you can either develop the white bishop or swap it off, then you have very good chances in the French defense as black. And so one tip I'd give you is if white brings this bishop down to here and checks the king, assuming these knights are not there, if this knight is still on its home base, you have a choice of defending the king with the knight or the bishop. I would always defend with the bishop and see if you can swap off bishops, because you'll be swapping off your bad bishop for white's good bishop. So it's a nice trade. If you can do that, and you develop your pieces well, you should have a good game with the French defense as black. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this video. The basic teaching principle being develop your pieces. And also use some pub chess bluffery if you're playing a casual chess against casual players. That's all from me, David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com for the time being.